Hi, welcome to the NIRI 2018 National Conference in Las Vegas. I'm joined by Gary LaBranche, President and CEO of NIRI. Thanks for joining us, Gary.
Thank you very much for having us, and thanks for being here in Las Vegas.
Absolutely. And Ron Parham, the Chair-elect of NIRI. Thanks, Ron.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Now we're here to discuss NIRI's updated guidance on quarterly guidance. Gary, perhaps you could kind of introduce this for us.
Sure, thank you. NIRI for decades has created policy statements on a variety of professional practice areas, and about 10 years ago adopted a policy statement on guidance. The board several months ago began a process of reviewing and updating that particular policy on guidance, and just this Saturday approved a new version that has some, I think, very timely updates to our recommendations to the IR practitioners within the IR community.
Sure, absolutely. Now, Ron, could you perhaps give us a bit of kind of historical context about the NIRI's sort of interest in earnings guidance?
Sure. Well, I mean, earnings guidance has been a topic of discussion and best practice debate for a long time within the investor relations profession, and it's really gone through years of progression and change. And we, as a board and as an organization, as Gary mentioned, have had a policy in place since 2008. Within the last 5 years, at most of our national conferences, we've had speakers who have shared with us their points of view along the lines of FCLT. And it's been a topic of discussion at the board level for some time. So we identified that it was time for a refresher and a look at this policy that we had put out in 2008, and it was informed by the more recent conversations we have had with several of these groups who care very deeply about that, and we took those things into consideration as we discussed and came up with this updated policy here. We started this real concerted effort in March and concluded it this weekend with the new policy.
Fantastic. Now, the idea of quarterly guidance may seem less familiar to our readers in Europe and Asia. And so it's interesting, this is of course a very topical issue in North America now as well, with Warren Buffett and Jamie Dimon. So to what extent, or what was the feedback that you received from NIRI members, Gary, when you began to discuss this year seriously?
You know, it's interesting you bring that up. As I've gone around and visited with NIRI chapters over the last year, I often ask about quarterly guidance. It's one of the 5 or 6 trends that I speak about all the time, and I will almost always take a poll of the group, when I'm speaking, and how many of you, issue guidance quarterly and that sort of thing, and very few, relatively speaking. Usually less than a quarter of the audience would say that they do that. In fact, one audience was literally one person out of 40 said that their company did, and he literally looked around and said, "Well, maybe we need to rethink that." And that's actually in keeping with the surveys we've done. We're always surveying our members and asking, and over the years, NIRI members have been saying a fewer and fewer percentage of them say that they are issuing more direct quality guidance. More typically, it's annual guidance, sort of updated quarterly, that sort of thing. And so that's been the trend, and that's one of the roles that NIRI has played for decades is, issuing statements on professional practice based on the input of our members, based on an analysis of the trends, and then over time things do change, and that's the living dynamism that is NIRI, of constantly refreshing and updating where things stand in the industry and in the profession.
And we heard during the opening remarks today some of the really interesting trends about the move from active to passive investing and so on, and that's driving much more of a long-term focus from a core investor base. But as we think about quarterly guidance, what does that mean for the relationship between the sell side and investor relations teams? Ron, perhaps you want to take that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've heard from the groups that we've been speaking to who are focused on this topic is that public companies need to look very closely at which audience they primarily serve. And we have heard from these groups that really, public companies have a responsibility to their shareholders, their owners, their institutional holders and individual holders as the owners of the company. And secondarily, not that it's insignificant, but secondarily to the sell side portion of the business. So I think what this policy does is it encourages, or this updated policy, it really encourages companies to take a step back and place those audiences in their sort of proper priority and make sure that they're crafting their guidance in a way that is going to be most useful for their investor base. And the policy does leave leeway for companies to apply their own judgment, boards and management teams to apply their own judgment and decide whether or not it is appropriate for them to provide quarterly guidance, either on a regular basis or situational basis as circumstances call for.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Well, I just have one final question for the two of you. Thank you for spending time with us today. Any recommendations for how I can win a small fortune on the blackjack tables?
I would say bet on black.
Okay, fantastic, excellent. Anything from you, Rob?
Go to a full table with someone who's good at third base.
Outstanding. Well, you heard it here first. Thank you both for joining us. We're thoroughly enjoying the conference, and best of luck for the rest of it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers.